Hey, beautiful soul, welcome back. If this reading finds you at the right moment, stay with me because the first card already tells us something powerful about the energy between you two. We have the Two of Swords. And wow, this is not a card of nothing is there. Symbolically, this is what happens when someone feels something strong and immediately tries to contain it. There is attraction here, but there is also hesitation. It feels like the chemistry landed fast, almost before either of you had time to make sense of it. One look, one conversation, one tiny moment, and suddenly the atmosphere changed. But instead of rushing toward it, somebody pulled back internally. That is what makes this so interesting. The blindfold in this card represents what we sometimes do when a feeling is too intense to process. We pretend we do not see it yet. We intellectualize it. We stay composed. We tell ourselves, maybe I imagined that. But the crossed swords, that tension is still there. So if there was a moment where this person suddenly became quieter, more careful, or strangely controlled around you, this card gives us a psychological symbol for that push-pull. Attraction on one side, self-protection on the other. And for some of you, I keep getting a very specific image. Eye contact that lasted just a beat too long, followed by one of you looking away first. That tiny moment may have said more than an entire conversation. You may also notice this person acting almost too normal around you. That can happen when someone is hyper aware of how they are coming across. They pause before speaking. They second guess a joke. They seem confident, then suddenly awkward. Not because the chemistry is absent, because it is noticeable, because body language often speaks before courage arrives. And here is the part I want you to hold on to. This first card does not resolve the tension. It introduces it. Something is being felt but not fully acknowledged yet. And the next card is going to show us what starts leaking through the cracks anyway. And what starts leaking through is not necessarily a confession. It is behavior. Because the more someone tries to manage a feeling, the more aware they become of everything they are doing around the person who triggered it. Suddenly, ordinary interactions are not quite ordinary anymore. They find a reason to say something to you when they probably did not need to. They stay in the conversation a little longer. They remember something small you mentioned days ago and bring it back up almost casually. Almost. And that word matters because there can be this strange effort to make everything look effortless. They might walk over like they just happen to be there. Ask a question they could have figured out themselves. Make a joke, then immediately watch your face to see whether you laughed. That reaction matters to them. And for some of you, this person becomes noticeably more animated around you. Their voice changes slightly. They smile faster. Their energy lifts. Then they catch themselves. And suddenly they pull it back. That is the push-pull we were already seeing. The conscious mind says, keep this normal. But attraction does not always cooperate. Sometimes it shows up through attention. They notice when you enter. They notice when you leave. They notice who you are talking to. They notice when your mood changes. And they may not even realize how much they are noticing until they respond to something a little too quickly. You say you are tired, and they immediately ask why. You mention something you like, and somehow they remember it later. You make one tiny comment, and they bring it up again because apparently it stayed with them. That is where things become interesting. Because when someone is genuinely indifferent, they usually do not have to work this hard to appear indifferent. There is no internal editing, no sudden awkwardness, no moment where they start saying something, change direction halfway through, and pretend that was what they meant all along. But when chemistry makes someone hyper aware of themselves, Even being casual can start looking strangely deliberate. And beautiful soul, those visible little slips may only be the beginning. Because sometimes the strongest part of this kind of connection is not what happens while somebody's talking. It is what happens in the silence when both of you suddenly become very aware that the other person is there. And that kind of silence can feel surprisingly loud. Not because anything dramatic is happening, but because suddenly both people seem aware of things that would normally pass unnoticed, where the other person is standing, who they are talking to, whether they are looking over, whether their voice sounds slightly different when they speak to you. And for some of you, there may be these tiny pauses that almost feel like the conversation has two layers. There is what is actually being said, and then there is everything happening underneath it. Maybe they ask you something completely ordinary, but their expressions lingers after you answer. Maybe you make eye contact across a room and neither of you reacts immediately. No smile. No obvious signal, just that half second of recognition before one of you looks somewhere else. And somehow you both know that moment happened. That is what makes chemistry so difficult to hide once two people become aware of it. Because now you are not only reacting, you are noticing each other react. They notice when your energy shifts around them. You notice when their tone softens. They say something casual, but you catch that tiny hesitation before they say it. You answer normally, but perhaps they are watching just a little more closely than the situation requires, and nothing about that proves some huge romantic story. But psychologically, it can show heightened awareness. This person is paying attention, and you may be paying attention right back. That is how a kind of private language begins forming without anyone deliberately creating it. A look means, I noticed that. A pause means, did you feel that too? A small smile can carry more meaning because of everything that happened before it. Even an ordinary goodbye can suddenly feel strangely unfinished. And once that pattern starts repeating, it becomes harder to dismiss every moment as coincidence. You begin noticing the difference between how they interact with everyone else and how they interact with you. But here is where the tension becomes even more interesting, because awareness does not always make someone bolder. Sometimes it does the opposite. Sometimes realizing, oh, this might actually be mutual makes a person even more careful. So if they are noticing this connection too, why would that make them pull themselves together even more instead of simply moving closer? Because sometimes moving closer would make the feeling harder to deny, and that is the part people do not always expect. We assume attraction should make someone more obvious, more direct, more confident. But sometimes strong chemistry creates the exact opposite response. Someone leans in during a conversation, feels how natural that closeness is, and then suddenly creates a little more space. They start talking to you first, seem completely comfortable, and then halfway through the interaction, their tone becomes strangely formal, almost like they remembered themselves. And for some of you, I feel like this person can be laughing with you 1 second, completely relaxed. Then something shifts. Maybe you hold their gaze. Maybe you step a little closer. Maybe there is 1 second where the interaction feels less casual than it did before. And suddenly they become aware of everything. Their posture, their hands, their voice, what their face is giving away. That does not automatically mean they are afraid of you. It can simply mean they are afraid of being too readable. Because if they do not know for certain how you feel, revealing too much can feel risky. They may be thinking, what if I am making this bigger than it is? Or what if they can tell? And sometimes the circumstances themselves make someone cautious. Maybe the timing feels complicated. Maybe there are other people around. Maybe this connection appeared in a situation where neither of you expected attraction to become part of the equation. So instead of moving forward immediately, they regulate, they become careful. And beautiful soul, that can create some confusing moments. Warmth followed by distance, confidence followed by awkwardness, a long conversation followed by a strangely short goodbye. Not because the earlier connection disappeared, but because they may have felt themselves getting too comfortable inside it. And here's where I think this gets even more revealing. During the interaction, they have something to focus on. You are there. The conversation is moving. They can respond in real time. But later, when you are no longer standing in front of them and there is nothing left to manage, that is when the mind gets quiet enough to start replaying everything. And once that replay starts, even the smallest details can suddenly feel important. The joke you made, the way you looked at them when they said something, how close the two of you were standing, whether that compliment sounded casual or maybe not quite casual enough. This is where attraction can become mentally noisy, because in the moment they may have seemed completely fine, calm, collected, maybe even a little hard to read. But later, when they are alone, that same person can start going back through the interaction piece by piece. Did I look at them too long? Was that obvious? Did they notice I got nervous? Why did that one moment feel different? And for some of you, this is exactly why the person who appeared the least affected may actually be processing the most afterward. They had enough self-control to keep everything contained while you were there. But once the interaction is over, there is nothing left to distract them from what they felt. So the mind starts filling in the silence. They remember your expression. They replay something you said. They wonder whether you were flirting or simply being friendly. They think about what they should have said differently. And maybe they even catch themselves smiling at a moment that seemed completely insignificant while it was happening. That is when this starts moving beyond simple excitement. Because attraction by itself can be easy. You notice someone, you enjoy their presence, you move on with your day, but vulnerability changes the equation. Now it matters whether the feeling is returned. Now they care whether they came across well. Now, one awkward sentence can bother them more than it should because your opinion has started carrying extra weight. And that is a very different kind of tension. Not, do I find this person attractive? They may already know the answer to that. The more revealing question starts becoming, why am I still thinking about this? And eventually, even that question shifts. Because the real turning point is when they stop wondering only, am I attracted to them? And start wondering, why do I care so much about how they see me? And that question matters because it means your presence has started carrying emotional weight. Not just attraction, not just curiosity, something more personal. Because chemistry can make someone notice you, but emotional significance makes them care about what happens when you are around. They start noticing your mood. They can tell when you are quieter than usual. Maybe you say, I'm fine, and they do not completely believe you. Maybe you mention something small that has been bothering you, and days later they ask whether it worked out. That is different, because now they are not only remembering details that make you interesting, they are remembering details because those details belong to you. And for some of you, this person may become unusually attentive without realizing how obvious that attention is becoming. You walk into a room and they seem to register it immediately. Someone else gets your attention and their energy changes just slightly. Not necessarily jealousy, not necessarily anything dramatic, but awareness. They notice where your focus goes because your attention has started meaning something to them. And there can also be this softness that appears during more personal conversations. Their voice gets quieter. They listen differently. They stop trying so hard to be impressive and become more present. That is one of the subtle shifts between wanting someone to notice you and actually caring about how they feel with you. They may also start wanting you to see the best version of them. They think about what they say. They want you to respect them. They care whether you think they are funny, thoughtful, confident, trustworthy. And suddenly, that mental replay we talked about makes even more sense. Because maybe they are not replaying everything only because they found you attractive. Maybe they are replaying it because your opinion has started to matter. And beautiful soul, that changes the chemistry too. Because once emotion begins attaching itself to attraction, ordinary closeness can feel much stronger. Standing beside you can suddenly feel different. A casual conversation can feel strangely intimate. Even something as simple as reaching for the same object or leaning closer to hear each other can create that little moment of heightened awareness. Because now the body is reacting to someone the mind has already decided matters. And that is the next layer here. Not just what they think, not just what they feel, but what happens when simply being physically close to you becomes almost impossible not to notice. And when that awareness becomes physical, even completely ordinary moments can start feeling strangely intense. Not because anything obvious is happening, but because suddenly you notice everything. The sound of their voice when they are standing closer, the way they smile when they are looking directly at you, the movement of their hands while they are talking, even something as simple as their scent when they pass by. And for some of you, I feel like proximity itself becomes the thing that changes the atmosphere. You can be having a perfectly normal conversation. Then one of you leans in slightly to hear the other better. And for 1 second, you are just a little closer than usual. That is it. Nothing dramatic. But suddenly, both people become aware of the space between them. Maybe somebody pauses. Maybe the conversation loses its rhythm for half a second. Maybe one of you steps back and starts talking a little faster. That reaction can be very revealing because when attraction is suspected on both sides, there can be this feedback loop. You notice them reacting to you. They notice that you noticed. Then they become more aware of their own behavior. And now both of you are trying to act normal while being increasingly conscious of each other. A hand brushes past yours. Eye contact happens at exactly the wrong moment. You both reach for something at the same time. And suddenly, a completely ordinary interaction feels much bigger than it should. Not because the moment itself is extraordinary, because the awareness already existed before it happened. That is what gives it weight. And beautiful soul, this is also why strong chemistry can sometimes create distance. Someone may physically step away because closeness makes them too aware of what they are feeling. They may end the conversation first, give themselves something else to do, move across the room. Not necessarily because they want less connection. Sometimes distance simply feels easier to manage than standing there trying not to react, but that strategy only works for so long. Because eventually, there is usually one moment nobody planned for, one unexpected second where the timing is different, the distance disappears, the usual self-control slips, and suddenly, whatever both people have been carefully managing becomes much harder to pretend they have not noticed. And when that awareness becomes physical, Even completely ordinary moments can start feeling strangely intense, not because anything obvious is happening, but because suddenly you notice everything. The sound of their voice when they are standing closer, the way they smile when they are looking directly at you, the movement of their hands while they are talking, even something as simple as their scent when they pass by. And for some of you, I feel like proximity itself becomes the thing that changes the atmosphere. You can be having a perfectly normal conversation. Then one of you leans in slightly to hear the other better, and for 1 second, you are just a little closer than usual. That is it. Nothing dramatic. But suddenly, both people become aware of the space between them. Maybe somebody pauses. Maybe the conversation loses its rhythm for half a second. Maybe one of you steps back and starts talking a little faster. That reaction can be very revealing. Because when attraction is suspected on both sides, there can be this feedback loop. You notice them reacting to you. They notice that you noticed. Then they become more aware of their own behavior. And now both of you are trying to act normal while being increasingly conscious of each other. A hand brushes past yours. Eye contact happens at exactly the wrong moment. You both reach for something at the same time, and suddenly a completely ordinary interaction feels much bigger than it should. Not because the moment itself is extraordinary, because the awareness already existed before it happened. That is what gives it weight. And beautiful soul, this is also why strong chemistry can sometimes create distance. Someone may physically step away because closeness makes them too aware of what they are feeling. They may end the conversation first. Give themselves something else to do. Move across the room. Not necessarily because they want less connection. Sometimes distance simply feels easier to manage than standing there trying not to react. But that strategy only works for so long, because eventually there is usually one moment nobody planned for, one unexpected second where the timing is different, the distance disappears, the usual self-control slips, and suddenly whatever both people have been carefully managing becomes much harder to pretend they have not noticed. And if both of you are participating in it, the pattern usually starts becoming harder to explain as one-sided, not because you behave the same way. That is important. Mutual chemistry does not always look like two people mirroring each other perfectly. Sometimes one person gets quieter, the other gets more playful. One moves closer. The other suddenly needs a little space. One looks away first. The other keeps watching for another second, and somehow each reaction affects what happens next. That is where the earlier contradictions start making more sense. The awkwardness, the restraint, the overthinking, the extra attention, the physical awareness. They may not be separate things at all. They can be different responses to the same connection. For some of you, this may look like one person becoming more confident when the other seems nervous. Then the nervous person relaxes, and suddenly the confident one becomes self-conscious because now the energy has shifted again. It becomes this feedback system. You respond to them, they respond to your response. Then you notice that, and the whole interaction changes slightly. That is why chemistry can feel so alive. It is not just one person projecting something into the room. It is two people affecting each other in real time. And again, that does not guarantee a relationship. It does not automatically tell you what happens next. But it can explain why the connection feels different from ordinary attraction. Because ordinary attraction can stay private. Mutual chemistry becomes interactive. You feel the other person adjusting to you. They seem to notice when you pull back. You notice when they soften. They become more animated when you engage. Then maybe more careful when the moment starts feeling too real. And beautiful soul, that is where the excitement can become almost impossible to ignore. Because now the question is not simply, do they notice me? There may already be plenty of evidence that both of you are noticing each other. The more important question is what this awareness is actually creating between you. Does it make you feel open, curious, safe enough to be yourself? Or does it keep both of you trapped in endless interpretation? Because even when the chemistry is real, decoding every look is not the final answer. At some point, the deeper question becomes about you. What is this connection waking up inside you? And what kind of connection do you actually want to help create from here? And maybe that is the most important place to arrive. Because when chemistry is intense, it can be tempting to keep searching for one more sign, one more look, one more message, one more moment that confirms what you already suspect. But beautiful soul, at some point, the connection has to become more than something you analyze. It has to become something you experience. And there is a difference. You do not have to chase it. You do not have to force a conversation before it is ready. You do not have to prove that every pause, every smile, every shift in body language meant exactly what you hoped it meant. If something real is developing here, reality will eventually give you more than clues. There will be consistency, effort, reciprocity. They will find ways to stay connected to you instead of leaving you to decode everything alone. They will become more open over time, and you will begin to feel less like you are solving a puzzle and more like you are actually getting to know each other. That matters. Because, yes, this chemistry may have landed immediately. It may have surprised both of you. It may explain the awkwardness, the extra attention, the moments of distance, the mental replay, and that strange feeling that an ordinary interaction suddenly had much more underneath it. But strong chemistry is the beginning of information. It is not the entire story. What happens next is where meaning develops. Does this person keep showing up? Do they make space for you? Does the connection feel mutual when there's no dramatic moment happening? Can both of you relax enough to be real instead of constantly managing your reactions? Those answers tell you far more than one perfect look ever could. So allow this connection to breathe. Notice what is there. Enjoy what feels exciting. But also let time show you what the chemistry is capable of becoming, because you do not need to squeeze certainty out of every interaction. And you definitely do not need to convince someone to meet you in something they genuinely want to be part of. If this spark keeps growing, you will see it in behavior, in openness, in consistency, in the way both of you gradually stop acting like nothing is happening. So beautiful soul, maybe the real message here is simple. Yes, something may have been felt very quickly. Yes, the chemistry may be unusually strong. But now you can let the connection reveal itself naturally. And whatever happens next, you do not have to chase the spark to know that you felt it.